Okay, this video is a step-by-step instruction on how to use this modified Fritz and Franz jig to make the three-way crosslap joint. This was the test and setup piece I used for my table build, and I'm just going to pull this apart. And I'm not sure how well these will show up because it's fairly light wood against a light background. But this looks like a complicated joint, but it's not really. If you want to think of this as a series of dados that are milled 60 degrees to the axis of the stretcher with different blade heights and different directions of the angle, that's pretty much what it will be. This is the bottom piece. The middle piece has two grooves and they are in opposite directions. And the top piece looks like a bird's mouth all the way to the 2/3 depth of the most important piece of this is that all of these pieces, including any spares, need to be milled to the same thickness, the width and length. And I recommend doing that all at the same time. Any finish sanding that you want to do, you want to get this as near to the final dimension as you can, because once this joinery is cut, any excessive sanding or hand planing or whatever you do will affect the tightness of the three-way crosslap. It's also useful if you have the width of the material milled to some number evenly divisible by 3, whatever measurement system you're using. I'm using the metric system, so these are milled to 30 millimeters width. I think they're about 12.5 millimeters thick, and I believe these are 350 millimeters long. Regardless of what it is, as long as they're all the same, you can do this joint quite easily on this jig. So the first thing I want to do, I'm just going to build this step by step from the bottom to the top. And for the initial setting, what I want to do is just mark a reference for the center. This particular build these are 380 millimeters long, so half of that is 190. And this is just a reference point, so I can set the initial position of this stop block. I'm going to pull this stop block out of the way. We'll deal with that later. What you want to do is get that reference mark hanging over the outside edge, but not too far, and this is to the center of the board. Everything is driven off the center, whether it be the center lengthwise or the center of the board thickness wise. And if I go too far, I'll have too wide of a groove and the piece will be wasted. Some useful tools to have on hand are some digital calipers and some feeler gauges. And I'll use these feeler gauges as I get closer and closer to the proper thickness or proper width of the dado, such that my piece will fit into. What I'm trying to do is make a joint that looks like that. As I get closer and closer, I don't have a micro adjust, so I'm going to use the feeler gauge to sneak up on that width. And the way I'm going to do that is, first of all, I'm going to make sure my calipers are zeroed. All my thicknesses are the same, and I'm at 12.71 millimeters. I'm not worried too much about the thickness, but so I don't have to do a whole lot of math in my head while I'm making this cut. I'm going to go ahead and zero the calipers on the thickness of the piece. So that way, when I go and subsequently measure the width of the groove, whatever number I'm taking, I take half of that number and then I can use the feeler gauge to adjust the stop block. And to make the dado and the fit tighter, I move the stop block toward me. To make it looser, I move the stop block toward the blade. I'm not going to show the clean out of the grooves, just of the excess material in the dado. Just to save time, I use a chisel and a router plane. And that should save us some time on the video, because I expect this one's going to be long enough anyway. My feeler gauges are metrics. They go from 0.05 millimeters to 1.0 millimeters. It works out well for me. 0.1 millimeter is the thickness of a sheet of paper, roughly. If you use imperial measurements, that's fine too. Either way will work. This is just whatever measurement system that you want to use. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and start this system, and I'm going to make the initial cut, which first I need to set my blade height. For my bottom piece, I need this cut 2/3 of the way through the width of the material. So I've got my saw blade is set to 20 millimeters high. The blade that I'm using is a Forest Woodworker 2 with a #1 OD grind. And what that does, it's different from the alternate top bevel grind. So this gives a fairly flat bottom of the kerf. And that's, I find that the most useful to me in doing any joinery. So let's go ahead and get started here, and we'll sneak up on this. I expect to make several adjustments, and then I'm going to check the fit with my actual workpiece. Okay, so what you want something that you have to force into place here. It should compress the fibers of the wood slightly. If it slides in too easily, you are going to have to, you're going to have a loose joint. So now that I've got this piece, the dado size, this stop block, I'm not going to touch that anymore. All my pieces are the same length. But what I ended up with was a dado that's 2/3 of the way through the bottom workpiece at a 60-degree angle. Now I'm not done cutting on this piece yet, but we're not to the point where we need to do the rest of it. Now what I want to do is, and what I like to do, particularly on sample pieces, is kind of get an idea to keep it straight in my mind what direction I need the grooves to go, because it's very easy to mess up and cut the groove in the wrong direction. So I'm going to take a pencil and I'm just going to mark the next piece. And all this does is give me the direction of the groove. Now before I take this apart, I'm going to do another thing. I'm going to use this configuration to set up my opposite side stop block. So I'm going to move this out of the way. I'm going to take my opposite side clamp here. I'm going to pull this tight and clamp it together, and then use that piece to set this stop block. And in theory, at least, the length to the edge of the dado on this stop block should be the same as the length of this stop block to the edge of the Fritz and Franz jig for the dado. That's just a tip I learned while I've been using this jig, because I did not want to go through the same process on the opposite side. Now before I actually use that, I'm going to check with my extra piece and make sure that I've got this set up correctly. But we're not there yet. So now I've made a dado. The width of this piece are actually a little less than the width of the middle piece, and 2/3 of the way through. So my posing cut, which is this, I need to be 10 millimeters deep, which is 1/3 of the way through the width of the piece. So I'm going to reset the blade height, and normally I would not be doing the step this way. I would be doing it, making all my 20 millimeter cuts or whatever height blade or height cut that I need all at the same time, and then I would go make the shallower cuts. So in order to make a groove this way, I'm going to, in essence, do the same process that I did here, except with the shallower cut, and then we'll see what we end up with. Okay, so now I've got the middle piece, or at least part of the middle piece cut, and what I should end up with is a fit that's snug. And if I've set my blade depth properly, I should end up with the two pieces flush on the top and the bottom. And I'm there. Okay, so this is my bottom piece. This is the middle piece that I just cut. The next step is with the third piece. And what I need to do is create a groove across the two-way crosslap there, right through the center. And I'm just going to draw some reference lines just so I can mark what I'm going to do here. It's probably not going to be centered. Actually, I know it's not centered. But what we're going to do, and I'm going to focus on this piece first, and then we'll deal with this one later. Because I need to go 1/3 of the way through this dado, needs to be 1/3 of the way through the piece. So I'm going to go 10 millimeters there. I'm going to knock the little corners of this piece off by 10 millimeters. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to take that piece out, take the opposite side piece out, and this piece on the middle will just be a regular groove. Now while I'm here, I'm going to end up with a 10 millimeter deep groove there. For the top piece, what I end up with is a bird's mouth looking piece, because I'm going to cut the dado this way, take that piece out, put a dado that way, and that will leave me two bird's mouths. I didn't draw that very well, did I? Oh well. The saw will fix that. Now the piece here, this will be cut on this end of the jig to keep the grooves straight. And before I get to that side of the jig, I want to verify that my groove width is the same as it is for this one. And that's strictly a verification before I go wasting some pieces. And that's where this extra work piece comes in. Assuming you haven't already used it for the because you went too far on this. So I'm going to take my extra piece here, and my blade is still set at 10 millimeters, which is fine for this operation. And let's go ahead and make this cut. And let's just make sure that we're the same width or tight. Looks like I'm a little too tight. So I'm 1.2 millimeters too wide, so I think I'm going to move the stop block another ½ millimeter toward the blade. The way I'm going to do that, just going to repeat the process. And let's try this again. Okay, so this is the bottom piece. And this is the middle piece. And let's see. I want to put these two together. For my top piece, this should fit in the groove tightly, securely, and yeah. So now I'm going to use the jig to cut the bird's mouth. And the way I'll do that, I'll make 2 cuts here, and then I'll make 2 cuts on the opposite side, just as we did before. But before I do that, since this is 10 millimeters or 1/3 of the way through the width of the piece, I need to adjust my blade height to 20 millimeters, which is 2/3 through. So I'm going to take care of that. And then we'll just go ahead and make the cut. Now after I stop this, I'm just going to go direct to the workbench, clean the cut up, and we'll see how the fit is. Now, I've honestly never had most of that material self-clear itself, but we'll see how this thing fits. And you may need some gentle persuasion. And that's how I make the 3-way crosslap